Okay, Chair, you're live on YouTube whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Scott. Welcome to this virtual meeting of the Economic Development, Environment and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel. Can I remind all participants that normal rules of procedure apply? For example, comments and questions need to be directed through the chair. As we are meeting virtually, proceedings may take slightly longer, so patience is appreciated. And while members of the public can view this meeting via YouTube Live, they'll not be able to actively participate or comment on proceedings. As this meeting is being live streamed, can I remind all participants that their conduct should reflect this? So the first agenda is apologies for absence. I believe we have apologies from Councillor Story and Councillor Dean is substituting. Welcome, Councillor Dean. Is there any other apologies that we have?
All the other committee members are present. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Really sorry. The second agenda item are declarations of interest. Do we have any? Can't see. Let me know. The third agenda item are the minutes of the last meeting that we held on the 21st of July. I'm sorry, did someone say something there? Sorry. Can I move that these? Has anyone got any comment on the minutes from the last meeting, or can we move them as read? Yeah.
Second that.
Okay. Agenda item number 4 is Middlesbrough Council's Green Strategy Scrutiny Review. We've got the Director of Environment and Community Services to give an overview of the Council's Green Strategy. So I'll pass it over to you, Jeff, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks for the opportunity to share the Council's approach to the Green Strategy. I have Simon Blenkinsop with me, a colleague in ECS who is leading on the Green Strategy, who's got a presentation that he's going to run through. However, before he does that, we've been dealing with coronavirus and all sorts of other difficulties over the last number of years. But it seems to me that the probably most largest of threats that we've got facing us is the threat of global warming and all of the associated costs and problems that that's going to deliver. Middlesbrough is going to do its bit in trying to alleviate the effects of global warming and hopefully, obviously, try and reduce it by the actions that it undertakes in its own way, in its own small way, in terms of contributing to that agenda. This presentation is very timely with COP beginning shortly up in Scotland, and the whole world looking at the UK for leadership on climate change. So it's an incredibly important subject, and I'm so pleased that Scrutiny has taken an interest in the green agenda that we've got. Sam will go through the presentation, as I say, but essentially we've got 3 broad or very, very broad objectives that as an organisation we're trying to facilitate or actually undertake ourselves. One is that the council itself should be carbon neutral by the end of this decade. The second is that Middlesbrough as a town should aim to be carbon net neutral by the end of the next decade, by 2040. But throughout that, we're increasing our level of biodiversity over the years to make sure that Middlesbrough is a biodiverse environment as it moves forward. So without further ado, I'll introduce Simon, who's doing a fantastic job on pulling the green strategy together. We'll give an overview. It's about 20 slides, so it's quite long, but I think it's worthwhile spending the time looking at it as an overview to the scrutiny panel's forthcoming works. Thank you, Chair. I'll hand over to Simon now.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Chair. If we can have the slides up, Scott, please. I'm not quite sure.
I'm sorry, Simon. I just want to check. Are we okay for questions at the end as opposed to during it, or what would you prefer?
Probably at the end would be better. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, no, that would be great. Some of you do know me, some of you don't, so I'll introduce myself. I am Simon Blenkinsop. I have been with the council quite a while in various guises. My current role is the Environmental Sustainability Manager for the council. And with that, my first task was to given to drive forward develop a green strategy in the first instance, and then to drive it forward. So this really is Middlesbrough's response to climate change and the climate crisis. Next slide, please. The Mayor's ambition is certainly to make Middlesbrough a green town. He's made no bones about that, and that's something what we're trying to do collectively across the board, and certainly hopefully you'll see the signs of that in Middlesbrough physically certainly is becoming a greener town with the trees and the flowers that we see around us. So those ambitions are starting to be realized. Jeff mentioned the ambitions around our carbon neutrality and the carbon neutral for the town as a whole by 2039, and to be a leader on environmental issues and also on biodiversity. So I'll talk more about those. Next slide, please. So we're trying to deliver a greener future, if you like, for Middlesbrough. So it isn't just about biodiversity. The climate crisis is real. Middlesbrough as a council declared a climate emergency in 2019 in full council. And so this is the response to that crisis and to that proposal. How we do that and how we deliver that is set out within this strategy. Various ambitions, some of them long-term, some of them short-term. So the first element of the presentation will be around the strategy as it is, as has been made public, and we did go out to consultation on this. So it is a public document, and we have got various responses back from that. And then the last few slides will be what we've achieved so far within year one of those ambitions. Next slide, please. For those who've been around long enough, you'll be aware that the One Planet Living proposal is one that our principles that we've adopted as a council quite some time ago, but way back to 2012, and we're still using those principles. Said quite clearly in council that we would stick by the principles that we have adopted, and those are the principles you can see listed there. I won't run through them, but it's a sustainability model very much on the lines of the UN 17 sustainability principles. These are probably much simpler format. So it, as well as about environmental improvement standards and awareness, it is about community cohesion, culture, the wildlife setting of the landscape, but also about travel, the materials, the products we buy. Obviously, zero waste is a big one, as is zero energy. So we'll cover all those in turn, and I'll tell you how we're trying to address these in each in turn. Thank you. Green energy is a big one for the council, as it is for the globe, I guess, as a whole, and we've got to reduce our carbon emissions. How we do that is going to be a key priority, and we set out our ambitions to be net neutral as an authority by 2029, which is a big task. Part of that is decarbonising, what we call decarbonising our assets and decarbonising our fleet. So we've started those measures, and I'll touch on those a little bit later and what we've achieved. But it's about obviously energy reduction measures across the board. And to do that, we need to use tools to monitor our carbon, to measure it, and to set carbon budgets, and then to start looking at reduction measures. Now, that's already in place. We do have various efficiency measures within the buildings estate, but perhaps we can go further and look at more radical methods. And again, we'll perhaps touch on those at the end. Next slide, please. Transport is a key one. It's not just for the council, but for residents and for the country as a whole. And the government has set out an ambition to have ICE or combustion vehicles off the road by the end of 2030. So there will be no new internal combustion vehicles. So we're already starting to see the switch over to electric vehicles, and it's how we address that and what we need to do as an authority to support that. We've just started our electrification of our own fleet, and we've purchased 5 new electric vans, and I'm sure that will continue as we move towards that deadline. So it's going to be a crucial role for the council to lead on. Thank you. One of the principles is around about biodiversity, and I'll certainly talk about more about what we've done as an authority so far and what we're planning to do and how much hopefully we'll see the changes as we start to move forward. But it has to be about community engagement. Culture and community is a key strand of the One Planet Living principles, and it's getting people involved in their local green space, supporting it, developing it, and encouraging wider impact through either school engagement or the local level, and improving our green spaces for the better of everybody, but also for people's health and mental well-being as well. So that is a key strand as we drive forward our sustainability strategy. Thank you. As an authority, we do have a responsibility, and one of those is certainly around about purchasing, and we have important decisions to make in terms of where we procure our services, the goods we buy, where we buy, who we support, are we engaging with local people, is there a social responsibility to that purchasing? So green purchasing and procurement is a key strand, and our procurement team are leading on that and looking at the social model of engagement and actually making sure it has an impact in terms of the local community and local business. So again, how we impact within business, how we engage, how we support business is going to be a key strand taking the strategy forward. Thank you. And waste is always going to be a big one. Our waste targets or waste levels sadly have fallen with the impacts of COVID. So we've got a figure in there. When we first started out, was averaging for quite a number of years around 33%. That has fallen now to 28% because of COVID. So it's how we address this, how we rise to this challenge, what we do in terms of the promotion and engagement. And we've started to do that. We now have an engagement officer in post looking at how we tackle communities where the worst affected areas are, and some of those areas are more challenging areas around Newport and North Ormsby. We're actually doing regular engagement programs on the ground, try to improve levels of recycling. So we've got a target of 40%. That's where we need to be. We're currently at 28%, so we've lots to do, but we're already starting to make inroads into that, which is good to see. And you'll see.
If I may just come in on that bit, just to explain to councillors why COVID has affected the recycling rates as it has nationally. It's really that people have been obviously at home a lot more over COVID, and our recycling rates calculated on domestic household waste. So there's been more domestic household waste produced because all of the stuff that people would normally take to work and dispose of, you know, lunch wrappers and all that type of stuff, people have been staying at home buying more. So the level of waste has gone up, and indeed to some extent people have been less proactive in undertaking recycling through the COVID period, and so we need to do a little bit of re-education, reinforcement around that. I'm hoping that bounces back a little bit. Obviously, we suspended green waste to some extent over the summer because of COVID. We've got that back up and running now, and the level of waste that's coming out through green waste over the last number of weeks is almost double what we'd normally expect. So we're already seeing that bounce back a little bit. So I wouldn't take the 28% as a figure that we think is going to be there long term. You know, we think that will short term bounce back, but we do have significant works to do to get to the 40% levels that we'd like to do. Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And another point around that as well is the big issue of contamination, and I think this is where education awareness comes in, because a lot of the goods and items that are put into recycling aren't necessarily recyclable because they can't be, because they become contaminated with food or other items. So again, that comes back to education and making that impact and informing people about the right choices in terms of recycling. So thank you. Next slide, please. Community engagement, we've talked a little bit about the green spaces, but community engagement is going to be key to driving our climate ambitions forward. It's already happening. There's an obvious picture of the Middlesbrough champions or the borough champions are doing great work out in the community, but not just litter collection, which is what we probably see most of, but they're engaging with schools, they're painting furniture, they really are making an impact on the town. And on the back of this, we have a great Green Spaces Forum team that look at a lot of our green spaces. So these are the things you perhaps don't necessarily notice going on behind the scene, but there's a lot of good work in terms of community engagement. And this is something we obviously need to encourage. And I will talk a little bit more about that and what's also going on in terms of Climate Action Middlesbrough programme when we get to the end of the slides. Thank you. Food is a key element, fairly obviously, and how and where we source our food. Middlesbrough does have a long existing food strategy and food partnership through Environment City, and the key ambition, we're currently at silver level in terms of sustainability food places. Our ambition is to reach goals, so we have a 22 carat gold slogan, which we've created to hopefully achieve our ambitions to have it become a recognized gold sustainable food place. So there's a bit of work to do there, but there's a lot of stuff happening on the ground, a lot of community engagement, getting people involved in terms of growing spaces on their doorstep, looking at where food comes from, can it be sourced locally, also looking at distribution of food and fair share. So we're hoping to develop a fair share hub in Middlesbrough very shortly when we get the go ahead of the premises, and also looking at potentially a farm start scheme within Middlesbrough to engage people in terms of the first steps of perhaps looking at farming on an urban scale as well. So there's lots of things happening, and you'll probably see more of that as we develop a program and start mapping this and making it publicly accessible. So food is a key element of that strategy. Thank you. As is health for that matter. One of the key strands is health and happiness, led within our environmental health team, and ambitions around improving health obviously is a key target for Middlesbrough as a whole, and how we look to deliver this. A lot of it is going to be around clean air strategy and improving the air quality with Middlesbrough, which is already starting to happen, but also around schools and school zones and have healthy school zones, how we engage people. One target or aspiration is to develop a Beat the Street program for children to get involved, so they're actually out of school, out of the homes, and looking at a program of navigation around their own neighbourhoods, but also looking around social prescribing models. So we're actively engaging people and looking at issues around mental health and addressing potentially green space access and things like that. So health and happiness will be a key element of the strand of the action plan. Thank you. How we lead and develop the strategy is key, and I've mentioned about the 10 themes. We actually have 9 action plan groups. One of the groups has 2 of those themes, and they are led, each strand, as you can see them there, are led by an individual health service, head of service. So whether you've got environmental services, public health, economic growth, planning, culture, procurement, economic growth again through transport, and then property services and Environment City leading on the food. So we've developed an action plan. Each theme has its own head of service and its own action plan, and that action plan process reports back into a strategic group, and we scrutinize those action plans, how we're delivering, what we've achieved so far, and I'll talk a little bit more about those and what we have achieved, as I say in the following slides. So this is a process we've set up with the governance process about a year ago, and it is starting to work. COVID obviously came in the middle of that, so I put a little bit of a delay on that, but that process is now starting to work, and we have a regular reporting mechanism coming back to the strategic group. Thank you. And partners, of course, are going to have a key role to play that. 13, particularly the university, the colleges, how we engage with these organisations. Some of them we already do, others we need to perhaps look at more and broadly what their ambitions are, what their carbon targets are, and how they contribute to the overall picture of Middlesbrough. So that's going to be a key process for us to engage, and not just with businesses, but certainly with communities and residents as well alike. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Thank you.
And Simon, I think it's probably worth mentioning in terms of decarbonisation of Middlesbrough, the 2 biggest producers of carbon in Middlesbrough are going to be transport and homes. We don't have lots of heavy industry in Middlesbrough. We do on Teesside, and obviously the Development Corporation is doing a lot in terms of decarbonising the Tees Valley, but in terms of Middlesbrough, we don't have a lot of heavy industry, so it is going to be homes and transport. Now, clearly, partners are going to be so important in decarbonising those areas, particularly social landlords and the transport companies that's in Middlesbrough. So, as Simon said, this is as much about the council doing its bit internally, but it's also about facilitating and working with partner organisations across Middlesbrough, so collectively we contribute to hitting those targets. You know, we won't be able to get Middlesbrough as a town carbon net neutral by 2040 just through Middlesbrough Council. It's going to have to be our partner organisations too, and I know that they are very much on board with this, and it's central to most people's thinking now. Thanks, Simon.
Yeah, thank you. And last slide of the strategy, and just a little snapshot to show that it is real, but this is not really as a scare picture, but to show that it's happening. So from one aspect, where one minute we're having floods and next minute we're having a heat wave of 28 degrees today. So the impact is real and climate change is here. So it's how we address that and what we've achieved to date. So we go on to the next slide. Let's talk about year one ambitions. So I mentioned about public consultation. We did go out to public consultation. Perhaps the response wasn't as good as we wanted or had hoped, possibly because that was around Christmas time. But we did get some good feedback and some good supportive comments as well. Mentioned about the action plan groups. So those are now up and running and reporting back to us on a monthly basis. A big success for Middlesbrough, possibly not widely recognised or acknowledged, but Middlesbrough Environment City were successful in bidding for £1.5 million of lottery funding to develop the Climate Action Middlesbrough programme. So that is already underway, and there is a lot of activities, a lot of projects happening on the ground. Climate Action Middlesbrough has various strands to it. I could go into detail, but it might take a little while. But it's very much about community-led, community focus, and projects on the ground, starting to see engagement so people can make informed decisions and also start to influence decision makers around how they want, what process and what mechanisms they want to see in terms of their own livelihoods, in terms of climate change. So that's already starting to deliver. The partners are Actes, Links, Tees Valley Wildlife Trust, and obviously Middlesbrough City and ourselves. So there's a lot of projects happening, and we will do more to promote that and tell people about what's going on and also how they can get involved. And biodiversity, I mentioned biodiversity at the beginning, and biodiversity is key for Middlesbrough. We have targets we're looking to increase our tree cover, for instance. If we go on to the next slide, perhaps talk a little bit about that. What we've achieved in terms of biodiversity in Middlesbrough, and this is within year one, realistically. We've created urban meadows. You've probably seen those around on our side of the road verges. We've also started looking at more environmentally friendly management of our existing verges, where we're not necessarily planting wildflowers or urban meadows. Planted 20,000 trees to date, and the ambition is certainly to plant another 20,000 in the next 2 or 3 years. We've developed our Buzz and Borough project and logo, and already starting to install beehives in and around the town. That is a tree hive you can see there, which was installed quite recently into Albert Park, and there's another one about to go up into Linthorpe Cemetery. So trying to become a more bee friendly and a more pollinator friendly town. We've created one new local wildlife site at Middlemarsh, which is North Ormsby, just alongside Shepperton Way in the A66, and there's another 2 proposed sites coming forward once they're adopted within the local plan system. And we're looking about how we can actually improve our management of our grasslands and our meadows, and we don't currently collect our grass cuttings for obvious reasons because of the logistics of doing that, but looking where we can manage our meadows and our grasslands better, and actually by removing horizons become more biodiverse and much richer grasslands. So that's something we're going to be looking at investing in for next year. Next slide, please.
Sorry, Simon, if I could just come in on that last slide, please, councillors. One of the important things around understanding how we manage our space in Middlesbrough and our green space in Middlesbrough is talking to local communities and councillors about that. You know, in Coburn Newham, for example, some of the main roadsides of there were left to grow long this year after talking to residents, and led to a more biodiverse environment there. Now clearly, we need to engage residents in there, and the sign at the bottom left, as I see it on my screen there, is a sign that we're hoping to be using around the town to say, look, this isn't a space that hasn't been cut because we couldn't be bothered to cut it, or, you know, we've run out of money. It's done like this for a reason. So I think there's a lot of education to be done as well with people to understand why we're introducing the mowing regimes and other things that we're going to do across Middlesbrough. So my ask for councillors is part of this scrutiny. If you could think about how we could engage with residents and others better to get them involved in discussing how we should manage their space. That would be really interesting to find out your views. Thanks, Simon.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jeff. I mean, I'll probably go back on that as well, Jeff. There's very well-versed practice and documented practice about leaving grass, and I think the days have long gone where we cut grass every 2 weeks within 2 inches of its life, and this is a regular routine, so it's got to be manicured. We've got to act more responsibly, and even just leaving grass uncut. You've probably heard of no mow May, for instance. Leaving grass uncut for a month allows flowers to actually flower, so you get clover and you get speedwells flowering. So even just small gestures like that actually have a big impact on pollinators. So that's something we're starting to look at right across the borough. Thank you.
Sorry, Sam, and I think what we'd like to see is less what I describe as green concrete, which is Simon's described as huge swathes of grass that are cut within an inch of their life with very little biodiversity or benefit there. And I think they don't look great as well. I mean, I'm a great lover of trees and etc. And I think if we can, grass is useful in its place. I'm not saying we should get rid of all of it, obviously, but I think if we can use those green concrete spaces better, I think it's the right thing to do.
Thanks, Jeff. Sustainable transport, I touched on the electric vehicles. So we have now purchased 5 small electric Nissan vehicles, and we have our first charging stations at Resolution House. You can see they're pictured, not usually with the flowering baskets ready to go out, but just so happen to get a pretty picture. So those vehicles are now installed, ready to use. The one difference with these chargers, they're something called E to G chargers, which means any spare capacity within the batteries of the vehicle at the end of the day, presumably using a normal cycle, say 8 to 4 p.m. cycle, spare capacity, because the mileage isn't great that they do, will go back into the grid. So there's actually a benefit of that. We actually get some income back from that because it goes straight back into the grid and then is charged again overnight. So that's a good step forward for Middlesbrough. And obviously we need to look longer term about how we electrify the whole fleet, if that's the route we go down. We've also undertaken a carbon audit for the fleet as well, back in 2020 by the Energy Saving Trust, which means we do have a baseline for our fleet, so we know how much carbon it's producing currently, and obviously we need to start addressing that and reducing that by electrification or energy efficient vehicles at least. Next slide, please. I talked about the education aspect of recycling and waste awareness, and you've probably seen these vehicles on the road. We've certainly done some publicity around them, and it's a good message to put out there to tell people that they have to think about the waste before they throw it away or before they put it into the wrong bin necessarily. So that's a good message, and that's just started the communication campaign for our waste recycling program. And on top of that, as I said, we now have a waste education officer within the council. We'll be starting to work with the schools shortly to look at recycling measures and what children can do, and obviously what message they can take home to influence parents. So that's going to be a good step forward and help to start looking to increase that target on recycling rates. Thank you. Next step. We, as I said, we have a smart carbon tool in place now, so we can look to put our baseline recording of our carbon budget where it currently stands and where it obviously needs to be, and the steps we need to do to make that change in terms of addressing 2029 target. So we can do that, and we expect obviously all our colleagues within the council to play a part in looking at those measures. So we need to start seriously how we may start to do that. So that's going to be a valuable tool in that process. On the back of that, we're about to launch a staff training module on climate change and carbon reduction. So an in-house development model, which certainly will be available for councillors to use or look at. And from that, we hope we will develop some green champions within the council. So we're asking colleagues to come forward and be a champion within their team, within their department or within their building, and look at measures we can do as an organisation, as staff members, in terms of whether that's energy saving measures, water saving, certainly waste recycling, and improve those figures. So that's going to be a key element of driving forward this our ambition internally as an organisation. Coming up next week, more imminently, we have on a week's time, we have in the lead up to COP26 in November, we have the big Green Week of Action. I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide, which is part of the Climate Action Programme and engagement with the public. So there is starting to see activities happening on the ground in engagement. We had the first People's Forum of the Climate Action Middlesbrough today, which I haven't had the feedback from, but that's good that we're actually engaging on a forum basis and getting responses direct back from members of the public. We also need to engage with public partners, stakeholders and businesses, as we talked about, because it can't just be our ambition driving it. It has to be Middlesbrough wide, and certainly we're looking to do training with businesses and offer support in terms of their own carbon reduction journey and how we can support and help that. And going back to biodiversity, going back perhaps full circle to where I started off in the council, I raised a suggestion here and it's open for debate, but do we go back to the days where we have a ranger, a countryside team in the authority? So much is happening in Middlesbrough at the moment in terms of biodiversity improvements, as you've seen, as I've discussed. How do we manage that longer term? And it's something we need to think about. These projects sadly come and go, and the Climate Action Middlesbrough programme, doing a lot of this work currently, is a 5-year programme, and that comes to an end. How do we continue the momentum is something we need to think about. And also planning gain is going to be a big focus for the planning system, and there's a lot of discussion around that from Environment English Nature at the moment and the Environment Agency. So within every planning application, there's any detriment to wildlife that has to be substituted and improved by at least 10%. It doesn't necessarily need to be on the same site, but has to be within the authority, unless it can be seen that it can't be made within authorities, it can be in a neighbouring authority. So that's going to be a key tool to improve biodiversity from all planning developments, and that's something we've got to be mindful of. But we don't necessarily have the specialism or special expertise within the authority. And how do we look at that to make sure we actually benefit from that? Because there's actually going to be finances supporting that mechanism, which is going to be really helpful. And I'll just throw that open for any other ideas for discussion. And the last slide is around the Big Green Week of Action, which I encourage you to get involved in beginning the 18th to the 26th of June. A big week right across the country leading up to COP26, part of the big push to raise awareness around climate change. And that is me. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Sam, I think you meant September rather than June.
Did I say June? Beg your pardon. Probably because I can't read that as well. Sorry. September.
That's lovely. Thank you very much, Simon and Jeff. That was really well presented. Thank you. We'll open to the panel, and then it is a new topic for the panel. So we'll then conclude with having a conversation about any further information we need to continue the scrutiny review. The first hand I can see is Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chair. One thing you mentioned there towards the end is about council land, etc., and if it goes for building. Surely, if we're not careful, we're going to run out of land, because you can't just pick another bit of land and put a tree in and things like that. I think from what you're saying, what we need to do is have some proper conversations about how we develop, how we take preserve green wedges that we've already got, how we look at land. I mean, some of it might be scrub land, and we perhaps could use some of the land elsewhere, but there's a finite amount of land. 55% of all available building land is in my ward, so that's why I'm saying it. So there is a limit to what you can do, and I agree with what you say. I'm absolutely 100% behind green energy, green space, green waste, etc., etc. But the problem is, if we keep building on 300, 400, 500 houses a year, you're going to run out of land. So it's fine saying we'll put it in Stockton, but surely that should go in Middlesbrough rather than Stockton. Thank you.
If I can come back on that, and then we're very fortunate to have Richard on the call, who may want to add his bit from a regen perspective. I mentioned kind of green concrete earlier on around Middlesbrough, and that's true. And I think, Councillor, it's about as much putting investment back into our spaces that we have to make them the biodiverse spaces that we want them to be, whether that be back corridors or what have you. As much as the traditional idea of spaces where there are homes and there's non-homes, you know, and I think the idea of planning game, from my point of view as Director of Environment, is that when planning does take place, that's kind of needed and it's going to have to happen. You know, the population's grown, thank goodness, etc. Is that we need to make sure that the land that we do have left is well invested in. And I think that's where, you know, in terms of those principles that we've got in terms of One Planet Living, in terms of the fact that Richard's department in terms of planning and regeneration are involved in the development of the green strategy, is to ensure that, that's happening across the organisation, and there's a cross-organisation view of that. So I don't think it's as simplistic as we've got some land, should we build it on or not. I think it's about how we manage the whole of our space in Middlesbrough, and a lot of that space just does need developing, because for a whole range of reasons, you know, it hasn't been looked after as well as perhaps it could have done in the past. Richard, I don't know whether you've got anything to add on to that.
I suppose that, Jeff, just to kind of reiterate something you'd said there, and to add to it a bit, it's not really about the amount of space we've got, it's what function does it perform. Because if you've got large areas of open space but nobody's using it, you know, you might as well have a smaller area of space that's been properly invested in, is properly maintained, has a proper biodiversity plan attached to it, and is used by people. So you're right, there isn't a kind of one size fits all answer to it. But I think sometimes the kind of the notion of open space and protecting it, people cling to that because it's a thing, where actually some of the alternatives might be better.
Can I come back on one little thing there, Chair?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, I don't disagree with what you're saying. You know, you could have areas of land which are scrub land, which might go better for something else. It could be turned into housing with some green space for people. But if you look at, say, original Hemlington development, how much green space is there, and you look at a modern development, there's nowhere near, because obviously builders want to get value for money from them. So this is where you've got to look at when you have a new development. If say, I don't know, in Colby Newham or wherever, you've got to look at what green spaces you've got and turn them into better green spaces. Hemlington hospital site, which is Hemlington Grange, which is in my ward, I mean, those fields were left derelict for years and years and years. It was a tragic waste of space, in my opinion. And you know, I've known that area for all my life, sort of thing. So that could have been used better than it actually was. But yes, we need to do this, but you know, in 20 years' time, there won't be any green spaces in Middlesbrough where we're going if we're not careful. There'll be little pockets around there surrounded by housing. So what I'm trying to say is, can we have proper conversation? Can we look at how we're going to do it? We need to build new houses. We all know that, but it's got to be done properly. And people don't want to just wake up next day and have a concrete jungle with a little patch of grass in front of their houses. So we've got to have a proper address. That's just my opinion. Thanks, Chair.
Well, I was thank you, Councillor Coop. I agree. There's a lot of like overlapping areas here, isn't there, between infrastructure and green spaces, and basically different service areas having the same agenda, which is, I think it's nice to see. Councillor Arundel.
Thank you, Chair. Can I first of all just say where I'm coming from? I sit on the Board of Environment City, and I'm also a member of the Friends of Bluebell Beck, and have been for about roughly 10 years. And I put an awful lot of work in down on that beck to improve it, because I recognise the benefits of mental health for people, and lots of people walk along there, especially during the COVID period, and enjoy the seats and everything else that we've put in. And this year, recognising that the benefit of a meadow, we've organised and paid for lots of meadows there, including Mandale Meadow, to be harvested this year. And me personally actually got bitten to death by black bloody horseflies for me efforts, to be quite frank. But yes, it's important that we do look after these areas. And like I say, I shall continue to do my bit, as I've been doing for years. And other thing is I'm quite pleased about, and I'd like a little bit more expanded on, is how it fits in the planning process, because it's important that you know, that this is included in any planning application, that we look at the effect on, you know, what we're going to do. You know, are we going to chop loads of trees down? Are we going to destroy loads of wildlife, you know, for the benefit? I know we have to have houses, but like Councillor Cooper said, we've got to do it sensibly. It's got to be a balanced thing. Thank you, Chair.
That was more of a statement than a question, I suppose. But if any officers want to say anything, put their hands up. No.
Okay, can I sorry, you, Chair, can I just have a bit more clarity on how it affects our planning process?
Oh, right, yeah. Jeff,
Richard, to answer that, sorry.
Richard?
Yeah, I'm probably not going to be able to give you a huge amount of clarity, Ron, because I'm not a planner, so I'd probably end up saying something that's not correct. But I guess this can be used in two ways. One is anything that helps the council bolster its policy framework that says this is what we want in the town, this is how we want to see it developed from an environmental perspective. The planners can then use that as a tool to defend areas and to make sure that they can drive for a higher standard of quality in a particular development. But also it's the sort of stuff that members of planning committee can kind of wave around in debates when applications are coming forward to say, this is what we want to achieve, this is what we want to deliver, this is what we want to see in Middlesbrough, and push developers and to some extent push the planners for those higher standards. If you don't have these kind of aspirations and strategies and plans, that's very difficult to pin down. So the more we do set out, the more we do integrate into the policy context, the better.
Thank you, Richard. Councillor Saunders.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I've got two questions, but I'll just have one now and I'll let the others have a share. It's just going back onto the green waste, Jeff. You alluded to earlier about you have to suspend it for a month due to COVID. I'm just wondering if there's any thoughts of you actually extending this to an extra month for what we've lost. Obviously, just because of COVID, that doesn't stop the grass growing or the bushes growing, and people still need to get rid of the green waste. And I'm just wondering if there's any plans at all to extend it by an extra month. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, in answer to that, Councillor, we're going to keep an eye on the tonnages and see what happens to the tonnages. We know that they normally drop off towards the back of the year, and that's why we went to the period that we went to. We went to longer periods between collections. In terms of that, we know that we've had significant levels of green waste coming out, the end of August. We'll keep an eye on that. If we've had a real big bump now and we go back to normal levels where we were, then there probably wouldn't be any need to extend it because we're collecting the same level of green waste. If we see that that bump is continuing, then I think we can review that, Councillor. But I think we're keeping that as a bit of an open agenda at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Thank you.
It's almost that horrible phrase, isn't it? We'll look at the data and see what the data tells us. We've been dealing with COVID for a long time and heard that phrase, but on this one we'll be the same. Well, let's watch the data and see how it goes.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Jeff. Cheers.
Thank you. Councillor Branson.
Thank you. Can you hear? Yeah, I'm sorry I arrived a little bit late. Unfortunately, I had a communication problem. We're looking at green issues, really. As was mentioned earlier, one of the biggest problems is transport, because that's one of the main polluters. And I don't think we can disentangle green strategy from transport strategy. And what I would like to know is what ideas the council have in order to improve transport, because of course we've had a significant reduction in public transport since 2010. And we also know that the big problem comes when you have a lot of vehicles in the centre of town moving slowly, because that's when the pollution hits its highest. I'd be looking really for a couple of things that we should be looking at, apart from trying to get those bus routes back. Things to make it easier for buses to get into town without being obstructed, such as bus priority lanes. We don't have many of those in Middlesbrough. And even considering maybe in the long term traffic-free zones, which is this idea that's been mooted in a number of local authorities. And I know it's very, very difficult, but I think in order to have a proper green strategy, I'd like to see some things related to transport coming in here. And I just wondered whether in fact there were any ideas along that line. Thanks.
Yes, Councillor, one of the strands of this is transport, and will be looked at both in decarbonising transport and improving transport links. Those are the big drivers, aren't they, really? And our regeneration colleagues and environment colleagues will be working together to look at that strategy and how we move that forward. It's not going to be a quick solution or an easy win, but we can certainly do need to have a strategy in terms of getting us to where we want to get to, you know, in terms of decarbonising transport and getting it to net neutral. And I know that the transport companies themselves are looking at all sorts of ideas around transport in terms of, you know, hydrogen buses and these type of things that are appearing. The train network's looking at hydrogen as well. So there's lots going on, and this really is about bringing all that work together and trying to develop a strategy and influencing that way forward. So it very much is in our mind, Councillor.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm just conscious of time. I know Councillor Mawson needs to leave by 5 o'clock, but I want everyone to have a say. So if I'll go Councillor Mawson, Councillor Furness, and then finally Councillor Hubbard. That's okay. Thank you.
Hello, thanks, Chair. Just one quick comment about grass cutting, and it's a positive one for a change. The grass was allowed to grow along in Stainton Way, and it's put another dimension on the appearance of that road, and it's been appreciated. Although I think it's been cut today, but thanks for leaving that grass long for a period of time along there. The other question, Richard, possibly directed at you. Housing. How intent are we on new developments being as carbon neutral as possible, housing, and what is being done or can be done to help make existing housing more neutral friendly, carbon friendly? Thank you.
Okay, do you want me to take that one now? Yeah. It's a difficult one to answer on the housing, because as we're finding with, if we use modern methods of construction as an example, there's a government push to do it. There's a perfectly sound argument for doing it, but the industry isn't wanting to do it. So we've tried an awful lot of things to get modern methods of construction into housing sites, which is kind of one of the ways of getting more sustainable development. So it's a challenge, because naturally the kind of the main house builders are dealing with, you know, their stock product, and they will make changes to those when it's commercially viable for them to do so. So it's that's really difficult. However, when you look at things like the urban living stuff at Middlehaven, we've got an opportunity there, not least because it's a new type of housing that's being developed there, but also the kind of people who are going to want to be in there will be looking for that. It's a good selling point for that. So I think we can try and push the boundaries a little bit further on that kind of development than perhaps, you know, another kind of volume built housing estate in the south of the town. But inevitably, it's going to happen when the government forces it to happen, because it's not yet a big enough selling point for people to pay more for it, and it's not yet in the big construction companies and house builders' interests to push it themselves. So I think we'll push for what we can, but until the government pushes it harder, it's going to be a challenge.
And just add to that, if I may, clearly the legislation is coming in around no longer being able to have gas boilers in the home will have a significant impact. Part of this strategy, I hope, going forward, will be working with social landlords and others to looking at reducing fuel poverty by increasing insulation, which in itself has the benefit of reducing fuel poverty, but also has an energy benefit as well in terms of decarbonising housing stock. So I think there's quite a lot we can do, but I very much agree with Richard. You know, the government needs to legislate, and it will do, and we need to encourage social landlords and others who have significant housing stocks to, you know, decarbonise their properties through energy efficiency measures.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Richard. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Furness.
Thanks, Chair. Few points have been touched on, but I've got to congratulate the council. I think since I've been a councillor, I've noticed the green strategy and, you know, like the wildflowers, the planting of trees in my ward, in all the areas that I've planted. It's been great. And I think the main thing is the infrastructure side of things. is like we need to encourage people to walk. We need to encourage people to leave the car at home. Also, I've just got an electric car myself, and finding out that there's not a lot of public charges around. And what is the council doing? Because we have a lot of public, obviously, car parks and public spaces. What is the council doing to improve the infrastructure of like the electric car network? Obviously, that's going to happen over the next 10 years. Would we work with private companies to install more chargers? Could the council themselves put more chargers in? And you see it's a way of maybe recouping costs by actually selling electricity, you know, to charge cars. Is this a possibility? And your thoughts on that, Jeff, or anybody who can answer that?
Do you want to answer, Richard, or do I? Because I know there's a significant piece of work being done with the TVCA and Richard's department in terms of installing electric chargers across the Tees Valley and of course inside of Middlesbrough. Richard might have more detail on that, but we will be looking at our own assets as an organisation to see whether charging points are useful to go in there. There are already some in car parks, for example, but do we start putting them in parks and other places is something that we'll be looking at. But Richard, I don't know whether you want to expand a little bit on the TVCA work with Middlesbrough.
Yeah, there's a bit of work that TVCA have commissioned to put electric charging points across Tees Valley, and it's a reasonable number. I've got to be honest, I can't remember how many it breaks down to, but it's a hell of a big increase on what we've got now. I think one of the issues that we're always going to have is in areas like Middlesbrough, where take-up of electric vehicles has been slower than perhaps some of the bigger cities, the infrastructure's always going to be lagging behind for the people who've bought one, and there isn't enough infrastructure to persuade people to buy one. So I think this investment by Tees Valley Combined Authority is going to be a big help in that, but I'm convinced that it's going far enough yet. That there's a lot needs to happen to make it a lot easier for people to be able to do it. And obviously, you walk around London and you see them all over the place, and if you see that, you're more likely to buy an electric car. At Middlesbrough and across the Tees Valley, there'll be enough to get by, but probably not enough to encourage people to go and buy electric vehicles. So I think there's a scenario there where we're always playing catch up, and it would be great to see greater investment going in that, but obviously we're doing what we can at the minute. We've had a situation today where we've been discussing about things like electric charging for buses, and that kind of stuff is obviously taking things a step further, and we're just going to have to chip away at it, because I don't think there's going to be one major investment suddenly goes in that solves the problem. We've just got to keep increasing the amount of them. We've got to increase the visibility of them, and we've got to try and persuade the public that there are enough for them to be able to buy an electric car. And obviously the council's looking at its own schemes about electric cars, and I think it's one of those things that's going to grow organically in Middlesbrough, rather than perhaps as it's done in the big cities, where it's become a very trendy thing to be doing, and you can see infrastructure everywhere. We're not quite at that stage, but we need to push for it.
I was just thinking, obviously, like the Stuarts Park, Albert Park, the Dinosaur Park, any area like that where it has a lot of obviously public seeing it, they'd be like perfect places where, even if it was like a private sort of partnership, where because there is private companies that do install these chargers, destination, and I just thought it'd be a really good idea. Obviously, like saying, it's about being seen, even if it's just 4 charging points at Stuarts Park car park. People will go, oh well, there's doing electric car charging there, so we could come charge our car for an hour, have a walk, and then be on the way. Just an idea. Thank you.
I think you raised some good points there, Councillor, in fairness, and particularly for like the end result of this section, we need to think about recommendations, to look at for the future. So it might be worth raising that then as well. Councillor Hubbard.
Thanks, Chair. Just to come in on what Councillor Saunders said earlier, I totally agree with him. I think the council have to move along with the times, with the changing of the seasons, with the green waste. We're seeing plants staying in flower longer. We're seeing trees holding onto the leaves a lot longer because of less frost. And we do get a lot of residents who do clean the outside of the buildings and sweep the footpaths, and it stops the council's drains being blocked up. So there's a benefit by moving maybe into November for green waste collection, could maybe do with if you want to stop one sometime in the summer. But you'd have to think about that strategy, but I totally agree with Councillor Saunders on that one. Just going on to about the grass cutting and leaving it for a month before you cut it each time. I think you'd have to take the public along with this, along on this one. And the way to do that, it would be to still litter pick on a frequent basis, because we know at the moment you only litter pick just before grass cut. And also, when the grass is cut, you'd have to blow the footpaths, because you're on about green concrete. We get green concrete on a regular basis when the grass is cut. So I think if you clean the footpaths adequately, I think you'd win the public along on that one. And just on about, maybe you could do a pilot scheme where you could have wildflowers instead of trimming everywhere and using pesticides. You could put wildflowers along walls, street signs, trees, because we know the damage that pesticides do. But maybe you could pick a ward next year, do it as a pilot scheme, and see what type of feedback that you get. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Jeff, I don't know if you're coming on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of those things don't have merit in terms of looking into, and as part of your scrutiny of those, of this issue, then we can look at all of those things alongside you. You know, I think that Councillor Hubbard's right, as is Councillor Saunders. You know, the world is changing, the climate's changing very quickly. And as I said previously, we'll look at the tonnage and understand what's happening, and that will dictate what's happening with the seasons. And we're going to have to react to that. I very much do like the idea of what you can do around signposts and other things. I think that's eminently sensible, and we'd love to try that. We want to use pesticides as little as possible. In terms of grass cutting frequencies and litter picking and blowing and those type of things, the only thing I would say is that this year has been particularly tricky for us in terms of staff absence, staff numbers, and all of the things in terms of the way in which we had to change the way we work because of COVID. I'm not using that as an excuse. I'm just saying it has been difficult this year. I hope, and actually what I would like to say, because we are in a public meeting now, is the staff have been absolutely magnificent in the way in which they've reacted to COVID and worked within environment services to keep the areas as good as it has been. They've done an amazing and fantastic job, and I'm incredibly grateful for all that they have done. But this isn't a typical year, and I would like to think that next year it's better than it was this year, and that has nothing to do with the staff and the effort they've put in. It's just the circumstance we've been in. But I'd very much like to look at all those things you've talked about, Councillor.
It's been a big learning curve given the lockdown restrictions. Councillor Coob, you've got your hand up again.
Yeah, I just want to, well, I echo what Councillor Saunders, etc., said about the green waste. Personally, you could have it all year round in my ward, and someone would put a green bin out. But I think it should run, perhaps, if the weather's good, till at least Christmas, even if it's just one collection, because it saves it's getting dumped in the hedgerows and things like that. So that's just a personal thing. I'm just going on from Councillor Furness. I just wondered how many charging points there are in Middlesbrough, either in public or private car parks, because I can't think of many. And some of the problems is that people park in them and stay there for most of the day. So, you know, you get in early in the morning, oh, I've got my parking space, plug it in, and that's it. So 2 or 3 are taken up very quickly. So I just wondered how many there are, if you know that question, and as rightly said, what plans you go to do others elsewhere, because I can't think there's any near the town hall. If all the councillors suddenly got electric cars, we'd have a problem because there isn't one. So I agree with this strategy, and it's something we need to go, but it's something we also need to know about, and what you're thinking about encouraging people to put more ones in, because some towns try to go electric, and there are different types of ones as well. So
exactly,
what is your strategy?
The only thing I would say, Councillor, about that and the use of electric cars, and you know, I'm in the process of considering one at the moment, is that they've improved so significantly over the last number of years, where it was a concern that if you went into a town centre, you need to find a charging place to charge them up. You know, some of them have over 250 mile ranges now. You know, it's not like the old days where there used to be 30 miles and then you'd have to top it up. So I don't think we should discount the fact that a lot of people just charge their vehicle at home overnight. Now that has difficulties for some people who can't have electric charging points close to their home. And I think we have to acknowledge that and understand what their needs are and put the charging points in the right places associated with that. But I don't think that there's that direct correlation between having a charging point somewhere and owning electric cars there was back in the day. As part of this project, we'll map out what's there, we'll try and get an understanding what need will be, and then we'll have to look at how we address that.
If I can quickly come on that, that's okay. Yeah, a lot of destination charges. So obviously Teesside Park has a whole row. And whenever I've been there, there's only one or two there. And then Tesco have electric charging points in most of the Tesco's now. Lidl do, Aldi, I think, are starting to do it. So I think it's a business model of a lot of, you know, shops and shopping centres where they're saying, you know, if you come to ours, you can charge it for cheap or for free, some of them. But the main reason why I was talking about sort of public charging points, so when I think about my ward, a lot of them are street houses, and it'd be impossible, you know, well, it would be impossible, it would be, you know, a logistical nightmare having loads of wires coming out of houses across the paths. So it's impossible for people in my ward, the majority of them, to actually even consider electric car, because unless there's the public infrastructure there, or at least some infrastructure where they can get a quick charge and maybe they can get half a charge in an hour or 2 hours, depending on the power of the charging point. But I think, obviously, I think like Binks car park in the village, Albert Park has the car park near the old Clairville site, and places like that, where people who live in my ward could possibly park the car for an hour or half an hour, get a charge, and then take it home. But yeah, I think it needs to be looked at. Thank you.
And I completely agree with everything you've just said about the difficulty in, you know, where there's terraced housing, or, you know, housing was built some time ago where there's not access to roads, etc. And I think the other thing we should encourage is where people go to work. You know, that a lot of people go to work and they leave the car for 7 hours during the day. And so I think there's encouraging workplaces to introduce charging points as well. I think it's something that we need to look at.
What I'm thinking is that, like, obviously it's such an emerging area. You know, in terms of the next step of this section about what information is required next, as a panel, maybe try to find an area or a different local authority where it's similar to Middlesbrough, where there may be ahead of us, you know, in terms of the implementation of this, and we try to, you know, like adopt best practice. I'm not entirely sure. I saw your hand up, Councillor Branson, sorry.
Chair, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm going to have to leave the meeting. I've got to take a dog to the vets.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Riddell. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think this issue of charging points is clearly a really important. One thing that we can do is put it into the planning process, so that when people are making applications to build certain premises, we required that they had charging points. Maybe we do that. We certainly should have a look at that. And maybe when people are looking at change of use, we can do the same kind of thing. Now, I don't know what opportunities there are for us to do that, but it did seem to me that's one way of pushing this, because otherwise there is a real danger that you're not going to have sufficient charging points. And my understanding is that it takes a while to charge the car up. So you can't just simply, it's not like filling it up with petrol. It takes longer than that. So you are going to need some places that people can leave the car or stay with the car for a while. And I'm not sure we've got enough of them. So any way in which we can push this, we should look at. And that's just one.
Thank you, Councillor.
Councillor, if I may just respond to that. Firstly, you can get very quick charging facilities. Places like motorways have them, if they're working, that is. You know, you can get a charge in a relatively short period of time. So that's certain to look at. But one of Scrutiny's jobs, as you're all well aware, is to go and look at best practice elsewhere and different ideas, and help us as officers come up with the ideas for the future. And this would be a great one for you to work with officers on, and, you know, go and have a look around, see what's going on in different places, what the emerging situation is, and come back and help us develop the policy. That would be great.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks.
So just moving this to the next level then, what we are at this stage meant to do is have just a discussion about what further information we require to continue this scrutiny. I'm thinking, like, if Susan can maybe keep me in line in terms of what I was thinking in terms of I was looking at different local authorities, but again, I'm not entirely sure whether or not that constitutes the foundation of what we actually need to do for this section. But if any members have got any comments about what, you know, from what we've discussed, any further information that they would like, and then we can finish this section. Is there any?
I had one small question. I was just wondering about, obviously, the council is saying we want to be carbon neutral by 2029. Have you got, like, is there the plan in place where you're saying, you know, we're going to have a total renewable electricity by this point, and then our fleet's going to be fully electric by this point, and this is how we get to the carbon neutral as a council? Is it done year by year, or have we just got 2029, we know we're going to be carbon neutral, and we slowly just drip feeding it? Have you got, like, set goals?
It's a little bit of both, councillor. So we've got kind of 9 years to get there now, 8-9 years to get there now. We've got the first 2 years plans of activity that we're going to do. This year's a bit of a baseline year in terms of we calculate what our carbon level is as an authority, and then we need to do the plan, the detailed plan to get us to 2029. And you're quite right, some of those decisions are going to be long-term decisions. So bin wagons, for example, we replace them every 7 years. So, you know what I mean, it's going to take us a time to cycle through what we've got. Now, remember, it's net neutral. So there's two sides of that. One is that we reduce our level of carbon. The other bit is obviously we increase our level of carbon capture and things like that. So yes, we've got our first couple of years. This is very much a baseline year in terms of finding out where we are. Then it's up to Simon and yourselves as part of this scrutiny to develop the plan that's going to get us to 2029 and beyond. So it is an emerging strategy, councillor, and you know, that's because we're learning as we go along.
Thank you.
Thank you. So just focusing then on what further information we need next. I mean, I've listened to the contributions of everyone. Councillor Saunders' point about green waste collection being extended perhaps for next year. I don't know whether that's something we could maybe bring forward for future scrutiny, and maybe looking at best practice in terms of implementation of electric vehicles. Quite how we bring that forward, I'm not entirely sure, but I think as a matter of principles, they seem to be two core topics maybe to get more information on. Do any of them, Susan? Yeah.
I was going to suggest, Chair, if you would like, perhaps we could get the officer who's dealing with the electric vehicle charging point installation at the Tees Valley Authority to come in and give us an update on what their plans are, and that'll give us a starting point as to what we can expect in Middlesbrough, and then maybe, as you suggest, go to other authorities around the country and sort of compare where we are in relation to those, if that's what members would like.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a practical way forward. Have any of the members got any thoughts or any contributions?
No, I think that's a really good idea. I think that's the TVCA are the ones that implementing the charging point infrastructure. That'd be the best place to ask, and then we can obviously scrutinise maybe the decisions that they're thinking about, as in, you know, placement and wards and maybe type of investment. But yeah, I think it's a good idea. Thank you.
We'd have to scrutinise that through the remit of Middlesbrough Council. But yeah, if they're working in partnership as like a stakeholder, then
yeah.
Councillor Coop, yeah.
Yeah, I agree, Chair. I think if the TVCA is the responsible authority, then we should get them in to talk to them and come up, as Jeff quite rightly said, and I mean, it's a chicken and the egg situation. It's no good supplying loads and loads and loads on every street when people aren't going to use them. And as Jeff said, you know, batteries getting better. There's 200, 300, 400. Eventually, they'll get to 600. So it's just the same as, you know, getting a tank of petrol, which is what the ultimate thing is. So it's quite right. There's no point in having too many charging points. But the thing is, you've got to encourage people Tesco's, Aldi, that's a great thing. But in the town centre, I just can't think of too many anywhere near the town hall. So we've got to look at it and have a strategy, and that would be great. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
And
Okay,
sorry, Councillor, just to come in on something that was just said, TVC aren't the responsible authority in terms of ensuring we have enough electric charging points. Middlesbrough Council is responsible for that. TVC are leading on an initiative because they have the funding, etc., in terms of introducing charging points across the Tees Valley. Because with these things, in terms of procurement and things like that, quite often it's better to have a bigger level of work that goes out of procurement. You get better deals, better prices, etc. And that's why the combined authority is there, isn't it, really, to bring things like that together. But just to, we are still the responsible organisation to make sure that Middlesbrough has enough charging points in place.
Great. We'll have to get a few more then. Thanks, Jeff.
Very much. So I think we'll conclude that section, and officers who have attended for that section, as always, you're welcome to stay, but you don't have to. So thank you very much for your contributions. Thank you. The next section for this panel is, I'm really sorry, I'm just going to get the agenda up. I'm genuinely sorry, I've had it up and see how disappeared. The next section is the post-COVID-19 regeneration scrutiny review. We've got a draft final report, which hopefully take it as being read. What we need to do is discuss the content of the final report and agree conclusions and recommendations for submission to the executive. I did have a conversation with Councillor Arundel, who wanted to discuss the implementation or having like a revised local plan from 2014. I know that's a bit of a contentious issue. He's not here, but I'd rather bring it up than just ignore it. But if any members have got any thoughts or any contributions, please raise your hand. Nope. Councillor Saunders, yeah?
Yeah, just suggest, obviously with Ron having to go urgently, we don't really know what his suggestions were to change it, so maybe we can defer it. Or I'm not sure whether you can defer it with it just being a draft report.
It's a good point, actually. Can we defer it, Susan?
Yeah, if you'd rather have more members there for the discussion, but what I'd really like to ask members is to come forward with some recommendations overall on the report. If I could suggest, if you just want to email me, if you don't want to discuss it now, and then we could put together, a list of recommendations and circulate those around the panel. That might be a quicker way to move forward if nobody's got anything here and now.
Just to lubricate more discussion, perhaps, as well. Councillor Branson?
Yeah, there are a number of things that we really need to look at. One of the things, and again, back into the transport issue, is increasing the use of walking, cycling and public transport. And section 61 says that improvements will be made to encourage this. I think we really need to be a bit more specific about what ways we're going to encourage this. If we could think of possibly in terms of cycling, providing extra cycle routes, particularly off-road cycle routes. In the case of public transport, looking at trying to reverse some of the cuts in the provision of bus routes that had happened over the last 10 years. And I think in terms of walking, need to look at whether we can encourage the use of traffic-free zones. Now, they're specific policies, but at the moment, all we've got under section 61 is a general idea of what we're going to do. So that would be my view. I don't know whether other people share that view with me.
Thank you, Councillor Branson. Councillor Cook?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, one of the things that it does mention here, it's my favourite subject, which is the fibre optic broadband and city fibre. I think city fibre would be a great thing, but I think they've started on, in my opinion, on the wrong side of the town. But hey ho, there you go, because you're still as lockdown has proved, Middlesbrough across the town has some atrocious broadband in parts. So I think if we're going to succeed in the future as a town, we need to get our fibre optic. When you go to some little tiny village in the middle of Yorkshire and they've got far better broadband than I've got, that's taken a bit silly. So that's another part of that, and I'd like to look at discussing that a bit further. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Fennis, yeah.
Yeah, obviously the report, it's great. It's obviously discussing all the things we've discussed over the past few years. And I think, yeah, it would be good if maybe Matt Story and Arundel were here to discuss more, because they have had big inputs, you know, obviously in past discussions. So I think it maybe should be deferred to be finalised. But yeah, reading the report, everything I've read so far has been really good, and I'm happy, you know, to put that to the officers.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Fennis. I think maybe having like a slight deferral, a deferral on it would be a good idea. Speaking with Ron, I think he just wanted to have a conversation about putting forward to the executive having a revised local plan being adopted no later than March 2022. I think the concern was the 2014 local plan might be out of date by this point, and we really should be having a review of that. But again, I know it's a bit of a contentious issue as well. So if that's okay, what we'll do is we will defer that for the next meeting to fully discuss and finalise. Is there any other contributions from members that on the report, Lord, or is that okay for now? Is that okay? I just want to check with Susan as well. What we've decided there to defer it, that's the timescale and everything else is okay. That's fine.
Yeah. What I'll try and work up some conclusions and recommendations based on what members have come up with this afternoon. I'll circulate those around the panel, and then if you want to look at it again at the next meeting, hopefully we can sign off the report then and get it sent to OSB. If any members have anything else in the meantime that they think should be included in the recommendations, if you just want to email the chair or myself direct. Thanks.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you. The next, oh, sorry, did I hear something?
I was just a bit there, just read it said about the £50,000 per ward. Is that something that's been finalised and agreed upon? I don't know if we know that yet. I do remember it was being discussed and they asked for councillors' views on how it should be spent. Do you know anything, Councillor Cooper?
Yeah, I think it has to be. It's got to be put in by the 24th of September. I think if you check up, but I think you'll find that if you speak to Martin Harvey, but I think you've got to get your proposals in pretty certain. So yes, it has been finalised as far as I know, and you've got to get your proposals in pretty quick. So because I'm working on that with my ward at the moment.
Yeah, I've got a few ideas as well.
Is there a specific form we have to use for this, or do we just send an email in? That's what I was thinking.
You should have had the sorry, Chair. You should have had the form sent to you. I got one, and if not, I'll send you mine.
Oh, yes, if you could.
That's interesting because myself, David, and Councillor Mason, we did have a meeting with the mayor about a subject in Copenhagen, but that was something that we discussed using that money for that, and I wasn't aware of any particular form, so it's actually quite useful for members to know this. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, if you can send.
Sorry, Chair, can we just clarify that we're talking about the same thing? Because I'm a little bit confused now. I don't know whether Richard wants to come in, but the £50,000 that we were talking about was from the external funding that we got through the Towns Fund. Is that the same sum of money that you're talking about, David?
Yes,
it is. Yes,
it is. Towns Fund, yes.
So there is a process in place at the moment for councillors to apply.
I mean, I have seen the email. I've seen an email which I'm about to reply to. I just wasn't sure there was a specific form. I'll check again. But if Dave Cooper is sending me one, that would help. We know what we want, and we spoke to the mayor about it. But obviously, we have to make sure the actual application goes in. I don't want it to get knocked back because we didn't send in the right application form. We just want to make sure that's done properly. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. So as a matter of principle, then we've deferred the final submission of that until a future meeting. The next agenda item is the date of the next meeting, which is the 6th of October 2021. And the 7th agenda item is just a review, an overview, sorry, of the OSB. We had that this morning, and the focus was on children's services. There wasn't really much that I recall that was actually in relation to our panel. I'll be totally honest with you that my internet was cutting out, and in those cases I typically go back to the YouTube video, but that's not been uploaded. But the only issue I remember being brought up was the announcement by the mayor regarding purchasing homes and refurbishing them. Councillor McCabe asked them the mayor a question about that, because I think a figure of 100 homes was mooted, and I gather from the response that the mayor put out in that meeting, it's an idea in principle, but the I could be wrong, but the figure of 100 homes that is being put out there, or that was mentioned at least in that meeting, it's not something that is backed up with any specific data as of yet. So I think there'll be more information coming forward about that. But from my recollection of that meeting, there wasn't anything else really of substance that would relate to our panel. Is there any questions? Or Councillor Saunders, you were the chair, so I don't know if you want to input on that as well.
You've explained it really, Chair. It was just, I think Councillor McCabe was questioning, he worked it out of 125 homes with £1 million that's available. It worked out just over £8,000 per home to refurb, and I think he was questioning that, but the mayor said really it shouldn't be like that figure, 125 homes. He couldn't guarantee that, so I think that's been put on the back burner. You know, there will be homes refurbished, but he couldn't give a specific number.
Yeah,
that was it really. But as I say, you've explained it really well, Stefan.
Thank you, Councillor Saunders. Councillor Coop, did you have your hand up as well?
Yes, Chair. I was just going to say that the mayor sort of tried to indicate, just Councillor Saunders just said, it was that he had no specific figure in mind, and a figure of 100 was given out, or 125 or whatever. So what he's trying to say is he's aiming for around about £1 million, and that's what he's going to pay for. But he did go into some more details about how he believed that it would be done, and we all sort of said, you know, what about landlords and private landlords? We went into more details, but yes, you've given a very good synopsis. So that, thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. The final agenda item is any other urgent items, and I believe Councillor Saunders. Yep.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I'd like to bring up, you know, it's getting to be a bit of a major concern, and Jeff's going to be there, so I'm hoping I can get some answers from him. Or it's regarding the pest control. Obviously, there was an article in the Gazette a couple of days ago. Pest control, the Middlesbrough Council have lost the contract with 13, renewing that contract. We've lost that. Obviously, my concerns of we don't know who's won that contract and whether they can do a better job than Middlesbrough Council could do. So obviously, there's 13 residents there that could be in jeopardy. And also, importantly, I know Unison are concerned about this, that the possible job losses that could occur over this contract, the loss of this contract. Namely, I believe it's alleged that if we do lose these couple of jobs, one person in particular has got over 20 years experience in the pest control department, and it would be a very sad loss to the council. I'm just wondering what other members think of that, and obviously Jeff can come in if he wants to. But I think it's a cross-party concern about the rejection of our recommendations of the last environment panel, where we recommended that every household, every resident should be entitled, you know, paying for it, by the way, should be entitled to pest control. And unfortunately, the executive decided not to go ahead with that. And I believe, you know, I mean, Jeff had concerns about whether it be profitable, but in my opinion, sometimes, well, the council are there to provide a service. Because pest control is not going away. In fact, probably getting worse. So, as I say, I'm just wondering what the panel think of that. And obviously, Jeff. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, I share your concerns. I think my thoughts on this are for now. We'll have. I'll open the conversation up for members to contribute. If Jeff wants to comment, absolutely, Jeff, you're free to do so. And then maybe we schedule this again for the next meeting as an agenda item to look into properly, perhaps. There's probably a lot that is unknown that might be commercially sensitive. So I'm thinking, rather than putting Jeff on the spot too much now, if you want to comment, Jeff, you can, but obviously we can table this as a proper agenda item for the future.
To answer the question now. It's
okay, Jeff. Yeah.
It's a relatively straightforward situation. 13 put a contract out for pest control because our pest control had come to an end. We unfortunately didn't win it. We were outcompeted by somebody. That means that there's a level of work that we obviously won't be doing anymore. So legally, we have to go through a 2P situation for any staff that might be affected by that. That is only in relationship to the 13 work. It is not relationship to the council work or work on council land. That will continue as it has done and will continue moving forward. So as of the end of July, we've done 756 pest control activities through residents calling and complaining about rodents on open space and places like that. That will continue to happen. The council is not withdrawing pest control from council-owned land. But the law of the land is 2 regulations is brought in to protect employment. And I'm not going to go into individuals on this call, and we won't be going into individuals on scrutiny because that's about individuals' personal information. So we're not going to discuss individuals like that. But all I can say is that there will be enough resource left to continue the activity that council needs to undertake on its open spaces and its properties. It's unfortunate we lost the 13 contract, but we were outcompeted, and there's not a lot we can do about that. We bid for work, and you win it or you lose it. We lost it on this occasion, and that's the situation. So standard practice, we bid. Unfortunately, we lost. To protect employment, we need to move that. Any employment that is affected by that over to the new company to protect individuals' employment, but in terms of what the council requires to do its land and open spaces, that will continue as it always has done, and will ensure that there's enough resource there to make sure that council work continues to take place.
Councillor Branson.
Yeah, I'd just like to support Michael Sanders, Councillor Sanders, when he raised the point earlier. I have a feeling that we actually were concerned about the fact that private residents weren't able to get pest control unless they went to the private sector. I think that was the issue. And certainly it is an increasing problem, there's no doubt about that. There's more rodents being seen in people's garden area. This is reported to me by residents in a number of cases. And I think the problem is really not so much tackling rodents on council land, but tackling rodents in private dwellings. Now, I understand that private individuals have to pay for this, but I think the problem was that the amount of money that private individuals have to pay for this is quite considerable. And the danger is that, of course, they won't. And rats and other things like that, they don't just stay within one person's property, they will pass to other people's property. It's rather like fire, it spreads from one place to another. And I think that really the council should be involved in this activity. I think they should be providing the service to all residents, not just 13 group. Well, we wouldn't be doing that anyway, given the present situation, but that we should be looking at providing that for private residents. Otherwise, you're going to have a real problem of rat infestation if we don't do something. That's what I feel on this.
Well, thank you, Councillor Brenton. As I mean, speaking personally, it's a service area which, you know, we've previously just been discussing about letting grass grow in certain places and things like that. And anecdotally, it has resulted in increased rat infestations in various places, so far as I can see. And it is a service area that you do want to be as well funded as possible and robust as possible. But I appreciate the difficulties when you are competing in a private environment as well. It's very difficult. Councillor Hubbard? I'm sorry, Councillor, but I saw you had your hand up before, sorry.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Chair. Yeah, I totally agree with Councillor Saunders. As a service, we're missing a huge opportunity in actually being able to provide a service for the residents. I think we owe them moral duty to be able to do that. As we also see on such as childcare, we see that starting to come back in-house, because we've always known that providing our own service is the best way to control it and be able to provide it for the residents at the best of our ability. Also, I think Councillor Saunders was quite right to point towards the possible loss of members of staff to the authority. And there wasn't going to be any names named, because Councillor Saunders wouldn't do such a thing, and I certainly wouldn't do such a thing. But there's a financial cost when we lose these people. It's not only the problematic for the person that's losing the job on the council and all the years service, but also there's a financial cost to the council. All the years training that's being put in, the expertise, the knowledge of the area, that's all lost. And the council's got to get real and understand these things. When they're bidding these contracts, there should be more thought. I believe that should go to it. And I think, Chair, might be an opportunity that we start looking into how this contract was bidded for, and maybe lessons learned on it, as the council always likes to say. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Is there any other comments from any of the members on this? Or Jeff, you can come back if you want. Or what I'm thinking for the next stages then.
Sorry, Councillor, if I can. There's two questions being raised here, actually. What Councillor Saunders and some of the councillors are saying is that we should provide a subsidised pest control service to the residents of Middlesbrough. That's a perfectly legitimate position to take, but clearly that was looked at the last scrutiny and wasn't agreed to in terms of the executive. Now, how that goes forward, if that's a political discussion that needs to take place. In terms of the only thing I would say about that is that we can't force private residents to use our services. We would be competing in a space with other competitors, and so it's not a case of like other services. I know it was mentioned about bringing services in-house. We have not outsourced our pest control services as a council. This was a private contract with a private organisation, private sector organisation, who put the contract out, and we didn't win it. It wasn't a case of us choosing not to do that, and it wasn't a case of us outsourcing our those jobs at all. It was we haven't outsourced Middlesbrough Council's pest control service. I'd just like to mention that.
Thank you, Jeff. Councillor Saunders. Yeah.
Yeah, can I just come quickly to that? Yeah, I totally agree with you, Jeff. But the thing is, under the previous administration, this council did provide that sort of service to every resident, and for some reason, which people can't answer or don't want to answer, there's no reason why that was stopped. I know you could say it was through budgets or budget cuts or whatever, but just make people aware, the panel aware that it was available in the past, and as I say, previous administration stopped that, and obviously that was in the past, but it was once available to every resident, I believe. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Sorry, just to say in terms of the recommendations that came up at the last scrutiny, you know, we did say in terms of the first scrutiny, you can't hypothecate council tax charges and things like that. But, you know, if politicians and others want to feed it into the budget consultation process, then that's the time to do that. You know, there is a process to do that going forward, which is about to begin actually. So that's the time to do that if members want to feed into that, and you know, the various political parties want to feed into that. You know, but the option of us agreeing at scrutiny to hypothecate, you know, council tax to a particular service isn't a legal one. But you know, if you want to feed that in the budget setting process, then that you've got every right to do that, and you know that will be discussed, I would imagine, and thought through.
Yeah, I'm happy to take advice from members on what we do next on this, because on the one hand, like, you know, we could agree just to have a further update on this where we scrutinise, you know, various options for the future. But I don't want it to necessarily just be a toothless exercise, because, you know, whilst Jeff in his role has obviously got a lot of discretion, we do have an executive of the council, which also dictates a lot of where it goes as well. So I will be honest and say I'm not entirely sure how members want to proceed with this. So have we got any recommendations from members? Councillor Branson, yeah.
Yes, I would propose that this was put back in as a suggestion to go into the budget. I don't know what the procedure is, but I really think that the Councillor Saunders was quite right on this. We did provide this as a service in the past. I think it's something that we do need to provide. Yes, I understand that people may go to other providers, and that's absolutely true. The trouble is that if other providers are too expensive, they won't go to anybody. And then this problem is just going to spread from one place to another. I think it is a council function, and therefore I think that we should be putting that forward. I don't know how to do that, but I would. That's what I would suggest that we do, because as a scrutiny committee, we put forward that suggestion, if I remember, at the last meeting, and I would like to see that suggestion go through one way or another. If the way to do it is to put it into the budget as a suggestion of expenditure, so be it. I would support that.
Thank you. Right. So in terms of what we actually do next, then I'm still not sure whether, I mean, we can include it as an agenda item for the future, invite Jeff back and you know, scrutinise it further. But I don't know whether that would necessarily be the most effective way to get any sort of action for what members seem to want from it. I'm not sure, but Councillor Saunders, you brought this forward. What would you like to see? And given the fact that you were chair of this as well, what outcome would you be looking for from this?
Well, unfortunately, as you alluded to, we did put it in as a recommendation, and very sadly, it was rejected by the exec. Because I know we don't about. I mean, I think Councillor Hubbard can agree with me. We did put it in as one suggestion as part of the council tax, but on another suggestion, you know, it's talking about being competitive with the private sector. I know Jeff has his opinions on that, but you know, I mean, it's a shame that Councillor Arundel isn't here, because he's had experience. My son-in-law's had experience. They're charging up to £160 for 2 visits to these private companies. Now they're there to make a huge profit. If you know, I'm not saying, and I know Jeff can't say too much, but you know, I believe it was about £70. The council charging 13. Whether the council made a profit or a loss on that, I don't know. But you know, it's a big gap between £70 and 160. And I believe, according to the article, we have 13 trained pest control operatives. I'm not sure. As I say, we have two or three very experienced pest control operatives. I just really think, it shouldn't be swept under the carpet, this, because the pest control in the town or in Middlesbrough in general is serious. And I believe we should, well, maybe it might be a cross-party pressure to bring it back to the executive for a rethink. I know it's not a call-in, but maybe we can push that back to the executive for a rethink, because as I say, this problem is not going to go away. It's not going to go away. So,
Susan, I'm just wondering, you know, we've agreed to defer that the report, you know, the post-COVID-19 recovery report. I don't know whether some of this actually would tie into that as well, and whether we could have for a future meeting almost a review of finalising that report, but actually having this as an element to that as well, or maybe a slight separate section to a future meeting. I don't know if it'd be worth doing that. I
think perhaps, Chair, we need to give it a little bit more thought to it, because we have been through the scrutiny process. As the director pointed out, we've taken that process. We made recommendations on the information that we gleaned throughout that scrutiny. We made those recommendations to the executive, and the executive gave us their decision. There is no process now, I don't see, for challenging that decision. That was the executive's decision based on our information, based on the service area information. I recognise that obviously with the 13 contract, that just changed things a little bit. But we've given the director the opportunity today to answer those questions. And his suggestion was that we could perhaps, if we feel very strongly, you know, that this service is something that residents should get, that we could feed that into the budget process. Other than that, than redoing a whole new scrutiny, I don't see where else we can go on this. Sorry, Jeff.
Let me just clarify that point about sending into the budget process. Clearly, I think what I'm saying is it's up to individual councillors or groups of councillors to participate in the budget process, and that's probably the way to do it. I'm not saying there will be an outcome from that. I don't know. You know, I'm not the politicians. I'm here. I'm the director, and I do very much agree that, you know, that I think, you know, re-scrutinising it, I'm not sure whether we're going to get a different answer, to be honest with you. We don't know how much we lost the 13 contract by. You know, that's commercially sensitive information. You know, and you know, we bid the best we could, and we got the outcome that we did. And in terms of the £70 one, Councillor Saunders, I know Councillor Hubbard's raised this in the past in terms of the Y13 getting charged that amount, etc. You know, that was a bid that was put in 3 or 4 years ago, and things have changed significantly since then. You know, so obviously that wouldn't be the bid that we put in. I'm not saying what the bid that we put in, but that wouldn't be the bid that we put in.
I think from my point of view, it's an important service area. The members of this panel clearly are quite passionate about it. So I don't just want to bring it up now and leave it here, but I'm not sure how to bring it forward. So I'm going to get advice on you know what discussions we can bring forward, and what mechanisms we can explore, you know, to explore the issues that are being brought up. Councillor Branson, yeah.
Yeah, one thing that occurs to me is this: 13 Group now have a separate system for getting rid of pest control. But 13 Group tenants and private tenants live next to each other. If you have a situation where a private tenant's house gets rats, it's going to go into the 13 Group property. Eventually, a 13 Group property, they're going to start suing that private tenant for the fact that rats are on in his house. And then eventually they're going to start blaming the local council because the local council hasn't tackled the issue. So, you know, it's like the fire thing in the past. You know, these things spread from one property to another. And we really do have to look at it in the round. I simply think if the best way to do it is to put it forward in terms of the budget process, great, that's what we should do. If the other one isn't a good one. But I think we're going to get ourselves into quite a bit of problems at some stage in the future where we do get 13 Group really coming on our backs and saying, you've caused the problem for us. And I think that it's going to be very difficult for us to argue back on that one. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Branson. I mean, just in terms of the inputting in the budgetary process, again, I'm not sure what specific mechanism as a panel we have to do that. That's my issue. So I'm gonna get, if it's okay with members, I'm gonna get advice on that, and we can discuss it in, well, if I bring it up as part of the any of the business in the next meeting, perhaps, and we can have a plan of action. You know, what I don't want to do is just have a bit of a toothless and pointless exercise for a future meeting, and for nothing to, you know, no proper resolution that could potentially be explored, if one can be explored, you know, to actually take place. So yeah, that's what I want to do for now. And if any members have got any questions, or you know, if you want to get in touch with me after the meeting, please do so, if that's okay. And for me, I think that is everything for this meeting today. So thank you very much, and have a lovely evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks
Bye.
very much now. Bye for now.
Bye.